Hey, it's Ken Gagney with YouTube channel Gamebits, here to play Super Happy Fun Block version 1.2, an iOS puzzle platformer from Ethan Benanav of Molten Tomato. This game was provided to me by the developer for the purpose of IndieSider, in which I play indie games and then interview the developer. Let's see, so let's start with a slide, and that's on my left thumb. My right thumb is jump. So this is the very brief tutorial stage that shows you how to play. And here are some red blocks that I am just running my character, who is aptly named Ball, head on into. And Ball is ineffective to destroy this obstacle until he realizes his superpower. Swipe to the right, and all the red blocks disappear. Swipe to the left, the red blocks reappear, and the blue blocks disappear. And I use this back and forth to make objects appear or disappear as they become in my way or out of my way. I can also swipe down, whoops, to make red and blue appear. Or, whoop, there we go, and jump in blue, there we go. And I can jump with the right button, and there is also a setting, whoops, that was the reset button, that's not what I wanted to do. There is a pause and then settings, and I can enable jump with left thumb, which I think is enabled by default in version 1.2, I could be wrong, but I started playing this with version 1.0, so here I am, learning all these new tricks to jump with either one. Amazing! Okay, blue, and now I need to jump in blue. Jump in red, I mean. There we go. If you swipe to the left, the blue blocks will disappear. Swipe to the left again, blue blocks will reappear, all without affecting the red blocks. But if you swipe right to affect the red blocks, it'll make the blue blocks reappear. So that was just the tutorial stage. That's pretty simple. And there were no stars to collect in that level, but in future levels there are stars, as you can see by indicated on this level select screen. So also no stars in level 2. This is just getting the lay of the land, and look, I can push things. They're not very happy about that, but what are they going to do? I can also pull things. There is no button to push to grab it. It just automatically happens as you approach it. It's actually pretty seamless. It seems like there would be problems with you grabbing things you don't want to grab and vice versa, but no, it's actually just fine. So this is a monochromatic world in which Block resides, and you can see that colored blocks are invading. So this is like the opposite of Pleasantville, where Tobey Maguire saw the colors as good and everybody else didn't. Here, our hero sees them as not good. Now these little lampposts that I checked, when you see the little ghost appear in it, that's actually a checkpoint. Whoops, whoa, there we go. Saves my progress, so I can pick up right where I left off. Should I die, and there are ways to die if you were to fall into a bottomless pit, for example, or if a block were to crush you. Whoa, now that was a meteor. Block! No. Ball! It's a block shower. Hurry, we'll be safe inside. Maybe not so much. Bummer, dude. Or not. Well, at least we weren't hurt. Oh no! I'll make you disappear. There. I want to get to the other side too, so I'm just gonna... I must have superpowers. Nope, that's actually me. This bridge collapsed. Leap across, die of starvation, or is there another option? Perhaps, maybe, yes. Let's go to that checkpoint. Oop, oh, that's a bad guy. And look, you can already see the bones of something or somebody he ate. Let's make him disappear so I can get right by him. There we go. I'm going to push this guy onto a switch, which opens this gate, which allows me to sneak by, make him disappear, reappear, disappear, push, platform, whoops. Now see, this is a timing puzzle because I need to make him disappear off that button, get on this lever, or whatever it's called, and then make it reappear. So here's another little puzzle. Push two of them, one on top of the other, and bam! I left that guy waiting on the edge of the bridge forever. He will never know what happened to me. Awesome! Now this is the first level that has a star that I can collect. So while I pursue the star, I'm going to interview Mr. Ethan Benanav about his development process, about how many years it took him to create this game and whether or not he used version control, and how he left Zynga to make his own game. So a lot about the development process while I explore the gameplay. So stay tuned. Today I'm honored to be speaking with Ethan Benanav of Molten Tomato, developer of Super Happy Fun Block for iOS. Hi, Ethan.
Hey, you totally pronounced my name right, so that's really cool.
Trust me, I've been practicing. So welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. So Super Happy Fun Block just came out on September 12th, was it?
Yes, exactly.
And how's the reception been?
Really positive. People love it. I've been doggedly watching the Touch Arcade forums and refreshing the reviews on iTunes, and so far it's all been just super positive, which is really, really awesome. The scariest thing is always someone's gonna not like your game, which will happen no matter how good your game is. But yeah, so far it's all been good, so.
Excellent, I'm glad to hear that. Not entirely surprised either, it's a fun game, but I'm surprised in the sense that there's not a lot of lineage behind Molten Tomato. You go to the website and it says this is Molten Tomato's first game, but it's not necessarily your first game. So before we talk about the game, tell me a bit about your own story. Before there was Molten Tomato, there was Zynga.
Yeah, so straight out of college, I got a job at Zynga as a programmer. I'd actually wanted to go directly into indie games, but I figured I'd apply to a couple companies that I thought, would be really good jobs to have. And if I got into any of them, maybe I'd take them and work for a few years and save money so that, I wouldn't be starving to death while trying to make my game. And I got hired by Zynga. So I moved ahead with that plan, basically. I worked there until I no longer enjoyed working on those sorts of games, the social game. And then I quit to make my own thing.
So what kind of games were you working on at Zynga, if I may ask? Farmville, presumably, or Texas Hold'em Poker? Chefville?
I worked specifically on Petville Mafia Wars 2, which was Zynga's quickest failure at the time. That was pretty cool. And Castleville.
So you stuck, when you left Zynga, with mobile games, but you transitioned away from the social games. Why was that?
Yeah, well, I'm not a big fan of social games. It was actually really cool working at Zynga and kind of coming to understand how much certain people loved those games. I'd always sort of thought these are the kind of games no one actually loves. It's just most people sort of like them. But that turns out not to be the case. So even though I was there as a programmer, it was very interesting as a internal designer to come to understand what people really liked about them. But even when you know that, if you just don't like the games you're making, it's not really satisfying after a while. So I decided to leave and make the kind of game that I love to play, and I really like having games anywhere. So it was really exciting when I got an iPhone and all of a sudden it was like this really compact and kind of powerful mobile device, because it's really annoying to bring around a DS if you don't have like a messenger bag or a purse to bring it in. But everything on mobile was like these really arcadey games, which are fun, or these social games. And I thought, why not make a platformer? Why not make like a really deep story-driven game that can just be done in these bite-sized chunks when you're on the bus or a train on the way to work? So I decided, well, if no one else seems to really be doing it, I'll just do it.
That's really interesting what you talked about wanting to work on games that you're passionate about, because in my own history, I, earlier this year, interviewed with a game developer who shall remain nameless, who makes mobile and social games. And I thought, if I get this job on their communications team as marketing, I'm going to be marketing a genre that I may not necessarily be passionate about, because social games are not my forte. And to be honest, neither is mobile. I'm first and foremost a console gamer, and secondly, a computer gamer. And there's not as much development in those areas in Boston. Especially for indies, you're making mobile games or Steam games. So to work in this industry, I was advised I need to be flexible, especially with mobile, which is where so much of the industry is moving. Just look at the changes Konami is making. And sometimes you need to make games that you may not personally be passionate about, just because it's such a competitive industry. You can't afford to be selective.
Yeah, and I think the best way to avoid that issue altogether, it's kind of like when actors start writing roles for themselves, If it's so hard to get a job making what you love, then just why not try and do it yourself?
That is fantastic advice, and that's what you did with Molten Tomato. Now you have Super Happy Fun Block to show for it.
Yeah, exactly.
So you were working on this game for about 3 years?
Yes, though in a sense, 8 years would be more accurate.
How do you figure?
It's actually, I don't know if remake is the right word. It's more of a second try at making this game with this mechanic. I actually made it originally with a group of friends as part of a class in college, when we only had 6 months to throw together this game, and we were all still pretty new to programming, and it was the first game any of us has made. And the game was like a complete mess, but the mechanic and some of the puzzles that we made were really solid. And so we always said, one day, like, one of us should go back and make this game work. And that was just always for 8 years in the back of my head. And every time I was playing a game, I was thinking like, oh, like, what can I learn from this to fix the original game was called Gamut, to fix Gamut when I remake it, So like when I played Fez, and it had this kind of connected world that you worked around in, I thought, oh, like, that's so great. That's so much better than these kind of disjointed levels that I felt Braid had and Gamut had. Like, why not try and kind of build a world you're walking around? And maybe at first the world doesn't seem to have much, but you kind of discover, like, in Fez, you find kind of archaic, like almost hieroglyphics that sort of almost tell a story, but I wanted to really have you find a story and like have you realize, oh, this isn't just this happy game, like this is the ruins of a world that's already been destroyed, and now I'm trying to save it. Yeah, for a long time I was sort of always working on it in my head, and like I've always drawn comics just since I was a kid, so I do little doodles for it. And then finally the time came where I felt like I need to just start working on this before it's too late and somebody else stumbles upon this mechanic and like makes my game before I do.
Now, you said you had classmates working on this project with you. Does that mean that you owe them royalties, or at least an honorary mention?
They are in the credits. I believe we made the game under the name Prism Games. And so I named, special thanks to Prism Games, and I listed all of their names, and I've also updated them about the game constantly. But as far as I know, none of them want royalties or have asked for it. If they did, I don't know. It wound up being a very different game, but yeah, I figure if they felt they were entitled to it, then I'd feel they probably were.
I think if they were that demanding, then they might go from being friends to being former friends.
Yeah, maybe.
So I noticed, didn't work with them. This was mostly a one-person show, but you did mention on the site's credits that you worked with Chase Bethia on the music. Who else did you reach out to collaborate with this project? What were your weaknesses that you felt that bringing in an outsider could help you buff up the game?
So yeah, as you said, music I have no ear for and no brain for. So that was like the first and foremost, I really need someone to do this, and I was very lucky. I actually bumped into Chase at IndieCade last year, and he showed him my game, and he loved it, and he was like, oh, I'm a musician, like, here's my contact, and we traded it. He said he'd contact me, and I met a few other musicians around the same time who the same thing happened with. But Chase was the only one, this is advice for other composers who are trying to get onto game projects, Chase was the only one who, when he did his follow-up email, instead of sending me a sample of like general work he's done, he sent me a track and said, when I played your game, this is like the music that it inspired me to make for it. And I loved it. It was excellent. So yeah, I hired him right off of that. The other spot I was really weak in is actually writing. I had an idea for the story that was pretty developed, and I think I'm a pretty funny person. I can make like decent jokes, but I couldn't really make a cohesive story that could be understood. And even when I knew what I wanted said generally in a scene, I just could not craft dialogue at all. And luckily for me, my girlfriend is actually a narrative designer. She used to work at Zynga doing that, and now she's doing contract work for other companies doing that. And so she's been a huge help. Almost every word in the game was actually written by her. or collaboratively by us. But if it's good, it was probably written by her.
Oh, that is quite the team you assembled. The anecdote about Chase sending you a sample, not necessarily a sample, but a track that he composed for the game, that is a good way to get somebody's attention and to stand out. But on the other hand, it also sounds a little bit like working on spec, where you're doing some work for free, and if it doesn't work out, then you have this track you created for a game that doesn't want it, and you don't have anything to do with it. So I'm not sure how I feel about that, actually.
Yeah, that's true. I think he could have always still posted it to his website as a sample of music he'd made. But yeah, you might be right. It could be a big risk and a waste of time.
True, but I think what would be a bigger issue was if you put out a call for musicians to create free tracks and you would choose the one you like. This was something Chase took the initiative on. It was his idea.
Oh yeah, you should never ask anyone to work for free. I think that's a weird thing a lot of people do because they don't have the money to pay people. And so they think like, oh, like we'll work on this project together, but then they don't cede creative control to the other person, really, right? So you're just asking someone to do essentially slave labor for you that you might not even use. So yeah, I would say never ask someone to work for free. But if someone wants to send you a sample to get contract, that's a really good idea. But I would never ask someone to do that. I've never told anyone who contacted me, oh, send me, like, make a song for me and I'll decide.
No, of course not. I certainly didn't mean to suggest that's what happened. I get that Chase did this, but I don't think Chase's approach would scale, per se.
That's also true, if you're, like, applying to 20 different games.
So you needed some help with the narrative and with the music, but the design and the development were all your own, and I noticed that some of the tools you used are called Cocos 2D and Box 2D. I'm not familiar with these. Are these programming languages, game engines?
Cocos 2D is a game engine that was made specifically for the iPhone and has been around for many years. If you've heard of SpriteKit, that's like Apple's own version of Cocos 2D that's pretty clearly inspired directly or ripped off. Yeah, inspired by Cocos 2D. Like the API is pretty similar. And Cocos 2D actually is now basically dead. They won't be updating it for very long. They're moving to to a C++ version of the engine so that it can be cross-compiled. Actually, they have the C++ version already, but they're exclusively pursuing that one in the future, I believe. And Box 2D has been around a really long time, and that's a physics engine that was written in C++. It was actually, I believe it was pretty popular with X&A games because it was a free and very efficient physics engine. And it was also very popular on Flash games. I'm not 100% sure, but I also believe that Angry Birds was made using Box 2D.
You mentioned that the newer version of Cocos 2D allows for cross-platform development, or will. Does that mean that the version of Super Happy Fun Block that you released for iOS is going to be difficult to port? Because I know you have PC, Android, and console versions envisioned.
Yeah, it's going to be a little harder than I thought it would be to port. It was actually briefly owned by another company called App Portable, and they had created software to compile Objective-C into packages for Android and other things. So I was kind of banking on that for a little while and thought I'd be able to launch it, at least on Android and iOS at the same time. But App Portable, I guess, went bankrupt or something. So yeah, I've been looking into Cocos 2DX and just porting my game to that, which, you know, it's going to be a lot of grunt work. Like, I do have to rewrite almost every line of code, but on the other hand, Cocos 2DX is structured the same or almost the same as Objective-C, so it should hopefully actually be pretty easy. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of, like, tiny bugs everywhere, and it'll take longer than I want it to take, but I think it'll be doable.
You mentioned rewriting all your code. Can you tell me a little bit about your development process, how you maintain your code and update it?
You know, when you're working alone, sometimes you take advantage of that, and you might write a little bit less organized than you do, for example, when working at Zynga with, you know, 20 other devs on something. I definitely have one file that is several thousand lines of code on its own.
I'm sure that Zynga has a lot more processes in place, especially when you're collaborating amongst a team.
Yeah.
You know, a lot more checking out code revisions and the like.
Yeah, it has a lot of that. I actually, and my friends and father, who's a programmer, always yell at me about this, but I did not use any source control for this game other than backing up on Google Drive.
Why would you do that?
So I originally was using GitHub, which is free if you have a public thing, and my thought was, no one knows who I am. No one will ever find this and fork my project, so no worries. And at the same time, I was doing art for a friend's game who was also using GitHub, and somebody randomly forked their project, which caused me to freak out and just pull my stuff from GitHub. And rather than smartly be, calm down and think like, okay, what's my options here? What else can I use? Like Bitbucket. I was just like, I'm not I'm not touching that again. So bad decisions made out of fear.
And did that come back to bite you in any way?
It hasn't for very long. Every once in a while, an update happens to Xcode that will break my game without me doing anything. And I spend, an hour freaking out and thinking, why didn't I back this up so I could just re-download it how it was? But then I always figure out what's wrong pretty quickly and continue on my merry way.
As a non-developer, the closest I have is something like Time Machine on my Mac, and I just assume that that's sort of keeping versions for me. And I think even the latest versions of Mac OS X may have its own inbuilt versioning system, which I either don't use or don't know how to use, but I've never really needed to keep a source control repository myself, so this has not affected me too badly.
Often it's used in professional settings, obviously, in case something weird happens and someone breaks everything in a very complicated way. But mainly it's a way so that you can work in parallel with other people and then carefully combine the code once it's all done, or so that you can work on a feature for a little while, and if you decide you don't like it, it's very easy to rip the feature back out simply by going back to a previous version. But I don't know, I wrote all my code very modularly, so it was very easy for the most part. If I was like, this feature is not so great, to just delete the files and remove one line of code somewhere else.
So speaking of features and ports, will the game be at all different when it releases on other platforms other than obviously the control scheme?
Probably, yes. I take a lot of pride in the fact that the game is pretty polished. People seem to agree that it's that way, but when I play the game, all I see are the things I wanted to put in and ran out of time for. So it would be really nice to at least throw a few of those things in when it comes out on Android and certainly on PC.
Yeah, I'm the same way with print publications. I try not to read anything I've published because once it's in print, I can't change it and all I see are the mistakes.
Yeah.
So at least with a game, you have the opportunity to update it and revise it and maybe even release a new version, which you will be, which is great.
Yeah.
Two more quick questions. One is about the game itself, which is that obviously it's very color dependent. That's the mechanic with the red and the blue primarily, and then some other colors. Now I have at least one friend that I know of who has some degree of color blindness, and a game like Puzzledrome, for example, has shapes that can be substituted for the colors. Is there anything like that in Super Happy Fun Block to make it as accessible as possible?
Unfortunately, there isn't. I did have something in there briefly that I hoped would work, but it didn't. And that might actually be one of the things that I revisit during the port. So for a little while, every block in the game shined. Like there would be this moving shine across it in one direction. And that direction matched up to the color, to the direction you have to swipe with your right hand to phase that thing out. And so my thought was, one, it would help people just remember which way to swipe when they're looking at an object. They see the red object and it's sliding to the left, so they think, slide my thumb to the left. And two, for people who are colorblind, they could just use those shines. but it turns out that it was just too subtle an effect, and nobody noticed it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm actually personally slightly red-green colorblind, and I do have friends who are more red-green colorblind than me, which is part of the reason that I made the game red, blue, yellow instead of red, blue, green. But I know that there are other forms of color blindness or people who completely can't see color, so hopefully I'll find a better solution while porting.
Yeah, that might be worth investigating. The other question is Boston Festival of Indie Games, Boston FIG, was just held earlier this month. In fact, it was held the very same day that Super Happy Fun Block came out, if I understand correctly, September 12th, and I was there, but I didn't stop by your booth. Were you there? Because you're not from Boston, you're on the West Coast.
Yes, correct. I am very far away from Boston, but I did go and show my game there, so it's a shame you did not see it.
Yeah, I think I did walk by your table, but I don't think I realized that the game had just come out because you had provided me with an advanced review copy for iOS, and at the time, I didn't know you were going to be on the podcast, so it didn't occur to me to stop by and say, hey, you want to come on the show? So I'm sorry I missed that opportunity, but was that your first time, since the game had just come out, was that your first time showing the game at a conference or a convention, demoing it to the public?
Sort of. It was my first time having the game playable to the public at large, yeah. I had showed the game to other developers at IndieCade's Indie Exchange, and I gave a talk for Sprite Builder, which was owned by App Portable, about puzzle designs using examples from my game at GDC. So those were semi-public showings of it. But Boston FIG was the first real, I have a table, my game can be played, come play it, tell me what you think, have a pin.
And what was the reception?
It was really positive, which was also really cool. It's always fun to see people pick up the game, and I'm always nervous because it's a very different way of controlling games. There might be a few things out there, actually, that are a little bit similar. I discovered Leo's Fortune at some point that has kind of similar controls to Super Happy. So I'm always nervous that I'll see oh, I was wrong and people don't understand these controls. But most people do. Every once in a while there was someone, it was interesting. I did a lot of testing of my game over the last 3 years. So I thought I knew every way that people can misunderstand it. And I did discover one new way, which is people, when they change the color of the world the first time to red to walk through those blocks, for some reason, maybe two people instead just kept swiping left and right. So that was heartbreaking because I saw someone just not understand the basic mechanic of the game. And that filled me with fear. But for the most part, everyone loved it. I think my favorite was when people were surprised that they liked it. I had these foam core cutouts, these 3D, not exactly 3D because they were flat, but they were little stands for the game and a little almost diorama or two that I'd made. So people would spot that and come over and be like, oh, that looks really interesting. And then they'd realize, oh, this is an iPhone game. And you could see them be like, I guess I'll look at it. But then they'd start playing, and a lot of them literally said, oh, I like this. That's really surprising. So that was all exciting and very cool. Some kids even took the iPads and iPhones and just sat on the floor and played it for a really long time.
That's really cute.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on defying their expectations about not liking your game just because it's on a mobile device.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Sort of the goal.
Yeah, I would certainly say so. So like I said, it's a fun game. I like the mechanics, and I haven't gotten too far into it to figure out exactly what the narrative is that's going on, but I'm looking forward to exploring more of the game. Remind our listeners where we can find it and you online.
So the game is on the iTunes App Store, Super Happy Fun Block, and you can also find it online. You can check out the website, superhappyfunblock.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Glazed Koala which is totally unrelated to any of those things. So might be hard to remember that one, but don't worry about it.
And where does that name come from, if I may ask?
In high school, when I was making AOL screen names for AIM, or not high school, middle school, I would just combine random adjectives with animals, and every week or so I'd make a new one to message my friends with. And I guess Glazed Koala was the last one I made when I got bored of doing that, and it just stuck as my handle for things ever since.
You should keep an eye out for another game that was at Boston Fig, Emily is Away.
Oh yeah?
Did you see that one?
I did not. I did not have time to actually leave my booth and look around.
That's one of the challenges of being indie. You can't man the booth and do anything else. But Emily is Away is sort of an interactive fiction game, but it's framed as an IM conversation with your friend Emily. You're both in high school, and she's texting you, I guess, or IMing you, and you choose which response you want, and then you sort of just mash the keyboard as the player, but all the right words pop up on the screen, so you actually start having a conversation. So sort of choose your own adventure. You're not free-form responding to her, but it gives the illusion that you are. It's kind of neat.
That sounds amazing. I think I actually saw their setup, because I remember seeing someone hung up a curtain and had the AOL Instant Messenger guy on it, and I was wondering what that could possibly be about. That's so very cool.
And just like AOL did, they were giving out their game on CD, which I pointed out to them was a bold move because not everybody even has a CD-ROM drive anymore.
Yeah, I don't have one actually.
Right, but they do have a download link. The game comes out next month, October 2015, and you can log online and there's a gameplay trailer. I think the disc they were handing out came with a download code for the first level or so, which was probably a Boston Fig timed exclusive. I'll have links to that and to your games in the show notes for this episode, which is a very useful thing, not only if you don't know how to spell Glazed Koala, but also if you made the mistake I did and go to Supper Happy Fun Block. Which does not work, by the way.
Maybe I'll buy that domain too.
Just buy all the misspellings. Put yourself out of business. So, Ethan, thank you again so much it's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks. It was fun for me as well.